it felt like it was a python snake, like a giant python snake passing through my spinal column. So I can feel it moving
Mm.
from the tailbone of my spine, and it's pushing throughout my spinal column, and it's
Yeah.
wrapped around the spinal column, but within it, and it's pushing upwards. And I remember it pushing up to my solar plex, and it pushed up to my heart chakra, and then it pushed up to my throat. I felt like I was choking, and I felt this thing trying to get out of my throat. So it got stuck in my throat, and then it pushed through my throat. So I feel like I'm vomiting, but there's nothing coming out. And it hit my third eye, and then it burst out of my crown chakra. And all I saw, now I can see something. I'm seeing trillions and trillions and trillions of light petals, like flower petals, pouring out of my skull, just pouring out of
Yeah.
my skull. And as it's pouring out of my skull, as it hit the ground, it would dissipate. I can hear the sounds.
Welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds.
Okay, hello and welcome to the Endless Possibilities Podcast. My name is Garrett. My next guest, former stand-up comedian and TV show host Morgan O. Smith, is a teacher of non-duality and has studied Eastern philosophy, metaphysics, and meditation for almost 2 decades. His desire to help others overcome difficulties and find inner peace arose after a spiritual awakening in 2008. Following this life-changing event, he developed Yinergy Meditation, a grassroots project that encourages emotional, mental, and spiritual growth through audio-induced deep meditation. His mystical insights have also inspired the thought-provoking and critically acclaimed book, The God Behind the God. Morgan, welcome to the show. Good to have you on.
Gareth, thanks for having me. A pleasure. Thank you so much. I have to update my bio though. It's actually over 2 decades now, 21 years now. So I have to
Okay,
update that bio.
okay, no
But yeah,
problem, no problem.
thank you for that introduction. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Great to have you on. We spoke briefly. I was just explaining to you yesterday, I got stuck in a little bit of traffic on the motorway. There was an accident. And yeah, I was listening to one of your previous interviews and I found so many similarities in your
hmm
story that kind of matched in with mine. So yeah, I'm really excited about this. So I wonder, could you fill us in on a little bit about your background and what brought you up to your spiritual awakening, Morgan?
As you said in the introduction, I used to be a stand-up comedian and TV show host. Had a successful TV show in Canada. That's where I live and grew up. I was actually born in Jamaica, but moved to Canada when I was about 9 months old. That's my background. My background actually originally prior to that, it was actually in music. And I moved from music, from songwriting, producing, and vocals to stand-up comedy. And then 2.5 years or 2 years after that, while I was doing stand up, I had an opportunity to do some TV stuff, which became very successful in Canada, and did that for 9 years. I did stand up for 12 years, but out of those 12 years, I did television for 9 of those years. And a lot of great things happened, won awards and things of that sort. And then the last 2 years of doing that TV show, I hit a crossroads. And there was something I knew was missing at this point, because at this point I'm about 30 years old. And something was missing. I didn't know what it was, so I needed to explore it, and eventually it led me to meditation. Not meditation in the traditional sense, but meditation through brainwave entrainment. So I was introduced to brainwave entrainment from a hypnotherapist, and they were using light and sound machines in their clinic at that time. Being involved with light and sound machines during our sessions, I was intrigued by that type of technology. So that led to light and sound machines that I went and purchased on my own and started experimenting with that. And then I moved on to a program called HoloSync, which I did for many years. Just from doing HoloSync alone, that just changed my life. I ended up leaving TV altogether and stand-up comedy altogether. Took 2 years off. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life at this point because I wanted to move into something that was more positive. Took 2 years off, still meditating every single day with this brainwave entrainment with HoloSync. And then eventually I decided to go into nonprofit. So I went into the nonprofit as a frontline worker and started working with people in that field during that time period. So during that time period, because I started working in nonprofit in 2006 and had a lot of breakthroughs from the time I started till that point, but nothing that I would call an awakening. But a lot of breakthroughs, a lot of spiritual experiences and things of that sort. And during that time period, lucid dreaming started to happen spontaneously. So I had some, like there was 3 days in a row where I had these really intense lucid dreams, moments of bliss, feeling drunk, feeling high, all that type of stuff that would happen naturally from the process of meditation. But also a lot of bad stuff would come up too. So like dark night of the soul and things in regards to the psyche, repressed unconscious material would come up to the surface from this type of meditation. And I was really curious because it really blew my mind of all the things that was coming out of my brain and my nervous system and out of my psyche. So once I got into the nonprofit sector, still doing my meditation. And then at this point, I'm talking a lot about meditation. I couldn't speak on anything of spiritual awakening or anything of that sort, but I was reading a lot of metaphysical literature at that time and a lot of self-help stuff at that time, which I would incorporate into my workshops, things of that sort.
Morgan,
Mhm.
did you know what a spiritual awakening was? Did you
No,
have any clue what was coming? No. Okay.
no clue, no clue. I had no idea what that was. It wasn't until I met this guy. I think I met him in 2006. He came off like like a spiritual enlightened being type of guy. I spoken about him before in many other podcasts and things like that, so I'm not going to get too much into it. But he was going around, and I saw him at this event, and he had a book. He had an Osho book with him, and I at this point I've never heard of any spiritual gurus or anything of that sort. But he decided to read a portion out of this book from Osho, but I don't remember which book it was. And whatever he said struck me. And whatever he said, I remember saying to myself, I want that. Whatever that thing is, I want that. And I've already been meditating at this point. Gosh, 4 years at this point. Yeah, I think I'm like 4 years in. So I knew I wanted that. So I remember the name Osho. But before I even get into the Osho thing, what I started doing was I had this idea, which came to me just before I started working in nonprofit. I'm like, what if I mixed this meditation with psychedelics? So that was my thing. I said, because I've never heard of anything of that sort. I didn't know much about psychedelics. I just remember trying it one time, trying shrooms one time, and it blew my mind. I had this amazing spiritual experience, and I wondered what would happen if I mixed the two together. So I tried these experiments. I was trying out these experiments with a friend of mine, and realized that when I combined the psychedelic with the brain entrainment meditation, it enhanced the experience. So it enhanced the meditative experience. It would enhance the spiritual experience. And I knew the difference because I've been doing brainwave entrainment on its own. I did this psychedelic thing once or twice, so I knew the difference of the two. And so I realized that when I put the two together, that it just enhanced it drastically. So I started to experiment with that on once in the blue moon. I did my meditation every single day, but once in the blue moon, I would combine the two. And I kept doing this for a period of time. So now I meet this guy. He has his Osho book, and I said, whatever that thing is, I want that. So I remember that. I remember saying that to myself. It was Saturday afternoon. I went online and started to download any free Osho thing I could find. And I found some documents of Osho having just interaction with some of his followers, and I would just read that stuff to myself from time to time. And whatever he was saying in there, I was so intrigued by this stuff. I said, I want whatever that thing is, I want that. He was the only guru I knew. I've never heard of Ramana Maharshi or any of these other people. I just was just focusing on Osho. At this point, I'm reading literature from time to time. I'm meditating. Once in a while, I'm doing the combination of the psychedelic, at the time was psilocybin, along with holosync. As time went on, I'm jumping here, but as time went on, this is now 2008. I'm meditating with holosync and realizing with the psilocybin, I realized how much it enhanced the experience. But this time when I was doing it, nothing happened. So I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. How comes did I take the psychedelic too soon? Because you have to time it. You can't just take the psychedelic right away and put on the headphones. You got to wait until you start to feel it kick in, then you put on the headphones. But I think at this point I did it a little too early, and nothing was happening. So I remember being frustrated. I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, I wonder if I can get to that state by doing the combination of these two things. But nothing happened. So I remember getting a little upset. I threw off my headphones and I just sat there and I said, I guess it's not going to work, just a waste of my time. As I said that, boom, Godhead. Just like that, boom. I've never experienced this thing in my life. It just blew my friggin' mind of what just happened at this point. So now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm God. I think I said, oh my God, I'm God. It doesn't even make sense. Oh my God, I'm God. And I looked around the room, and everything I was looking at was divine. I was looking at the walls was looking back at me. I looked at
Yeah.
my bed, the bed was looking back at me. I looked at the other items in my room, all of it was looking back at me. I got up, I walked around, and I said, everything is me. But I didn't mean me as Morgan, but just everything was me. I walked out the room, and I checked on my boys were really young at the time, and all I saw my two boys, but all I saw was me playing in their bedroom. I was like, I went into the bathroom. I went to the washer. I went to the bathroom. I stared at the toilet. I'm looking at the toilet, and all I saw was me. And I went, oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back into my room, and I just sat there for 3 hours in this state. And I just couldn't believe what was happening in this moment. I'm like, oh, I am it. I am that.
Yeah.
All this stuff is pouring out of me. Oh, so I sat there for 3 hours. At some point, the experience dissipated, and I couldn't believe what took place. And I thought I went insane. I'm like, for 2 weeks, I said nothing to it. I didn't say anything to anyone. I was just every single day, even till this very day, I still think about this thing. And I went, what the? That is incredible. I never, what? Oh, is this what Osho was talking about? And 2 weeks later, I decided to tell my coworker, one of my coworkers. Actually, I told another one of my friends prior to that, and he got upset because he's an atheist. So when I was telling him my experience, he hung up the phone on me. We never spoke again until this very day.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, I don't think this is something I can just go around telling everyone. So I went and I told my coworker, because I knew my coworker, he's not a judgmental person. So I went to my coworker, I told him about the experience, and he said, wow, whatever it is that you're doing, continue doing whatever it is that you're doing. So I decided to tell one of my participants who wanted to get into meditation and all that. And he said, yo, whatever it is that you're doing, I want that too. So he was excited. And so I said, wow, I don't know. I want to talk about this. I don't know where do I go? How do I? So what I did was at that time, being a youth worker, there was a philosophy program that was running at one of the Catholic schools. So I went to the teacher who had a good rapport with. I went to the philosophy teacher and I asked him if I can come in once a month and just talk about spirituality, things of that sort. And he says, yeah, come on in. It would be great for the kids to hear something from the Eastern perspective or anything of that sort. So at that time, I didn't speak on the stuff from my perspective. I told it from a third person perspective of all these things that could happen and all that stuff. And I'd come in every month for about 8 months, and I would just talk about this type of experience. Now, this type of experience that happens, which I probably put into the category of Turiya, never happened again for about 2 years. So I'm still meditating every single day. There's different levels of holosync, so I'm doing my different levels of holosync at this point. I can't remember what level it was at because I'm 5 years in at this point. But it didn't happen again for another 2 years. And then 2 years later, I'm doing the same thing that like I did before. Because at this point, I've done shrooms and the meditation how many times after that, and that never happened again. A lot of great experiences, but not like an awakening type of experience. I said, this state is really hard to get into. 2 years later, though, I'm doing the same process, and boom, I hit it again. I went, oh my, I couldn't believe what took place. So this is exactly the same what happened before. Weeks later, it happened again. So now I'm able to tap into this thing, whether I'm doing psychedelics or without psychedelics. I can tap into the
And
state.
Morgan, in between, had you noticed that your quality of consciousness had changed, right? You were having these peak experiences. From what it sounds like, God was waking up through your form, right? The aperture opened up and then closed back down. But did you notice that you were different in between?
Different in the sense that I had that awareness. It never went away.
Yeah,
So when I came back to myself, I was still referring to everything as God. That
yeah,
state, that was permanent. But I was back in myself, still going through all the things I needed to go through as a human being at that
yes,
point. It
yeah,
was years later is when that started to kick in.
yeah,
Yeah, so when the incident happened the first three times, I'm still going in and out of it. And sometimes when I speak to someone, I still refer to God. Sometimes I refer to God as an external force, as opposed to
yeah,
it being integrated at times.
yeah.
So that was still happening, but there was a sense that I knew that everything was of the same source, and that always stayed. But as time went on, that started to change more and more. So at this point now, what happened after that? After this point, I've had these three experiences. and other experiences that were happening without the psychedelics. And at some point, I needed to know more about what was going on. So I started to do more research. I didn't have any names like Brahman or anything like that. I didn't know about any of that stuff. I just referred to everything as God, but not God in the sense, not in a mythical sense, more of a broad, unified sense. I remember telling another coworker about the experience, and there was a person that was in the room who was a Christian, and he was highly offended when he overheard what I was saying to the coworker. And he mentioned to him, "Don't have that guy coming back in here talking that blasphemous stuff in here. I'm a Christian, and what he said was blasphemy." And he was saying how he was totally offended by what he heard from me. So he told me to just watch myself when speaking of these matters. Time went on, and at this point, things started changing. Like I gave up meat right away. It didn't happen right when I started the experience, but in 2008, because this happened in the spring, so by the fall time, I just lost the urge for meat. Until this very day, the urges never came back. So I stopped eating meat. There was other changes that I would make. I was nicer to people and giving more back to people and things of that sort. So a lot of things were changing, but they were gradual. And there were things that just would never change. They just always stayed intact. After some point now, because there's so much to the story, I just don't know where to go with it. At this point, I meet a group of guys, and they were also into consciousness. So I meet a group of younger guys who came under my wing, and we started doing these experiments, with brainwave entrainment and with different types of psychedelics. At this point, I've only done psilocybin. So someone introduced DMT. I read about it, never done it. I didn't know who to get DMT from, but these group of guys had it. So we started doing these experiments with DMT, and this story wasn't an awakening, but the first time we were doing this thing together, we were doing it outside. And I remember doing DMT the first time, and we're not using the brainwave entrainment because we're outside and there's just too much to take on. But I'd still do my meditation in the mornings and things like that. So one of the guys, he gives me the DMT, and I was already blown away what DMT could do. So I don't know what it was like for them because they weren't doing brainwave entrainment at that point yet. So I don't know what it was like for them. So he gives me the DMT, and I became one with the ground. And I remember the worms and the bugs and everything coming out of the ground. And I can feel it. I can feel the worms and everything coming out of me. And I went, holy shit. And then I came out of it. And he asked me what the experience was. And I told him, and he goes, "That's not the experience." I went, "Oh, are you serious? That experience was profound." He goes, "That's not it. Let's wait about an hour and we'll go again." So I waited an hour because there was other people lining up for it to try this DMT. And then he came back to me. I went into, I believe it was his vehicle, and he gave it to me again. And then I don't know if you've ever done, I don't think, based on what I've heard, it didn't sound like you've ever done psychedelics, but based on what I heard in your
No,
interview.
psilocybin. I've taken psilocybin
I see.
LSD as a teenager.
And
Yeah.
LSD as a teenager.
Yeah.
So he gives me the DMT. I'm in the vehicle. And I've told this story so many times. I'm going to give a shorter version of this story because I've told it so many times. I'm bored of telling it, but
yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to jump the story here. I remember just my consciousness just rushing, it blasted off like a rocket ship. And I'm in this space of darkness. And then there was this tree being, and the tree being had these fruits on the being, and each fruit was a child. It was like a cosmic being of sort. And I realized in that moment that one of my metaphysical bodies was one of these fruits, that the fruit tree kind of picked me off, I guess when I was ripe enough, and it let me go so I can create my own universe or something like that. It was one of those experiences. But in front of me, this tree being, which was a mother-like being, it transformed into this other type of being. So it transformed into this giant, the size of, well, I'm in Canada, so I'm referring it to the CN Tower being one of the tallest buildings in the world. It's not the tallest anymore, but it's now, I don't know, probably number 5. I can't remember where it stands on the list. But it was the size of the CN Tower. This being was made, it had dreadlocks pouring out of its head, but each dreadlock had eyes throughout each lock. The arms were like tree branches, but they were intertwined with each other, and they made up the 2 arms. And the legs were its roots, but the roots were intertwined, and it made up its 2 legs. It was sitting in a lotus pose, and it was doing a mudra while sitting in the lotus pose. But the being itself, being as tall and big as it was, made out of trillions. I'm exaggerating here, but it was made out of multiple beings. I would say thousands of beings, just all aligned, just thousands of beings, all the way down to its hips, from what I remember. And the beings had their arms crossed like this, and they were singing the sound. Oh, it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my life. And this being was beautiful. It was radiant. It was. I looked at the being and I just burst out into tears as I'm looking at the being. The being realized that I was there and it looked down at me as if I wasn't sure if it was looking at me out of curiosity of how I got there. I wasn't sure what it was. But this being was just magnificent. And I'm staring at the being. I start crying, and my tears, as it was rolling down, it went into the ground and it was absorbed into the ground. I came out of the experience. I said, "Holy shit." I ran out of the vehicle, ran down the street crying and bawling my eyes out and laughing. So I'm laughing and crying, tears of joy. I said, "Oh my God," for an hour. And everybody around me saying, "What the hell happened to him? We've all had experiences too. That never happened to us. What's going on with this guy?" I'm sitting there, I'm running. I threw myself to the ground. I just couldn't believe it. I was like, "Oh my God." And that was my DMT experience. It wasn't an awakening. It was just this incredible spiritual experience. As time went on, and we were still experimenting with DMT, I decided, let me try the DMT, because DMT is very short. It's very short acting, right? So it's like, okay, I have to find a way. How am I going to do the brainwave entrainment, do the DMT? Because DMT only lasts like the maximum of 18 minutes. So what I would do was sometimes I would do DMT in the last half hour of my hour meditation. Or I would finish the whole hour meditation, and right after the hour meditation, I would do the DMT. And eventually it led to non-dual type awakenings, which were just
Okay.
absolutely mind-blowing. And I got to see my true self as who I really am, but even at deeper levels than with the psilocybin sessions. After which, some time went by, and we just decided to do experiments with LSD. So we moved into the LSD. So what would happen if we did LSD with the combination of brainwave entrainment? And we started doing that, and that opened up a lot of the what you would refer to as the self-realization. So that was intense. That got I won't get it. I can if I went into that, that would take just like if I went into the DMT thing, that would take days. If I talked about the LSD,
Yeah.
it would take days. So time went on, and we said, okay, what about ayahuasca? So we met this high priest who had a connection to a shaman who was facilitating and using ayahuasca in his ceremonies. So we got a hold of this shaman and we started going down to see the shaman. And we would sneak in, I would sneak in, two of us would sneak in our brainwave entrainment stuff and into the facilities. And we would try ayahuasca while under the brainwave entrainment. And it had its own mind blowing experiences as well. Nothing non dual or anything like that, but just real deep self realization type of experience. And then time went on, and I met a girl at that one of the ceremonies because I went to see the shaman about 12 times. So I think it was at the 10th time, the ninth or the 10th time, I met this female at one of the resorts at the ceremony, and then we became friends. And at some time, I don't know, I can't remember how long later, she said that she was going to see a facilitator who facilitates 5-MeO DMT, which is very different than DMT. For anyone who's tried the two, 5-MeO is probably 1,000 times more powerful than DMT. But what people probably don't know this 5-MeO, you don't really see anything. It's not a visual type of psychedelic as DMT and NDMT. So after she had that, she went to see the facilitator for that, the practitioner. I remember calling her up and asking her how was the experience because I read about 5-MeO DMT because I got that book. What was it called? Tryptamine Paradise? What was it called? Yeah, I think it was called Tryptamine Paradise. Tryptamine Paradise. And she said, I can't explain what took place. I'm like, what do you mean? She says, Morgan, give me a few weeks just to wrap my mind around this. I'll get back to you. But you never did. So I remember it was a long time later, probably a year or two later. I just don't remember. And I contacted her and said, hey, you never got back to me about the 5-MeO DMT thing. And she goes, Morgan, you got to do it for yourself. Let me hook you up with the practitioner. So she hooks me up with the practitioner. I go to see him. I had to go through the whole assessment and everything. I go to see him, and he gives me a 5-MeO DMT for the first time. And that blew my effing mind. Far more than the psilocybin, far more than NDMT, far more than any of my experiences without the substance. It blew my friggin' mind. This was non-dual. This was non-dual to the highest degree. My mind
So
was
what experience did it give you, Morgan?
uh, unity consciousness. It
Okay,
was
so
uh,
I
go ahead,
spoke
go
to a
ahead.
few people I've spoke to a few people and they tell me that they get blasted into non-existence. No direct experience, just into that nothingness where there's no existence. And a lot of them come back and it takes an awful lot of time to integrate it. But it seems like it brings them to that Brahman state, right? And yeah, like total non-duality.
Total non-duality. Magnificent. I don't even know what this, because even though I would like to say non-existence, it was like both. It was existence and non-existence. It was a
Yeah.
non-duality between the two of those. All right. I would
Okay.
say that there was no me
Yeah.
experiencing whatever was happening. I was just one with everything. But I thought that would be the most that would ever come out of that. I said there was nothing could ever beat that experience, because I did it a number of times with the same practitioner. I'm like, there's nothing that could beat that experience. It got to the point where after coming out of the experience, I started having a lot of seizures. Now I know
Mhm.
them as being kriyas, but
Yeah.
my arms, my legs would just do its own thing at its own accord. It would do mudras, and my legs would just fold into yoga positions on its own. I would get these spasms in my stomach. That if I get the spasm, and I can still make it happen. So if I had these spasms in my stomach, my whole upper body would start to jerk. If I flex my chest muscles, they would flex on its own, on and off, on its own. My face would make these facial expressions of happiness without my intent. All these strange things started happening. At some point, it started to dissipate, but all these things started happening for a number of months. And at this point,
Morgan,
I've done. Sorry, go ahead.
was that
Sorry.
Kundalini? Was that Kundalini coming online, do you think?
Yeah, oh, yeah, oh, definitely. Oh, yeah. But
Yeah.
even then,
Okay.
even of all the experiences I had, because at this point, I probably had about 50 awakening experiences and maybe an extra 70 spiritual experiences and things like this. It was definitely Kundalini. I knew what Kundalini felt like, not to its full potential yet, though. So I'm feeling all this stuff. I know it has to do with Kundalini because the Kundalini activation, which has been happening from since 2001. That's when I had to start looking up and found out about Kundalini. I had to do my research about that, and so I knew everything that was happening had to do with Kundalini. But other strange things started happening. I'd break out in rashes and things of that sort would happen in my body. I guess that was the purification of that.
Yeah.
Soon after, at this point, I was convinced. There's no way you convince me of anything otherwise. I was like, listen, this is unity consciousness. This is God. This is the ground of all being. Blah 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 blah. Nothing could tell me. You can tell me anything otherwise. And of course, things are changing within my personal life. Things are getting better. Things about my personality is changing, and my relationships are changing. All these great things were happening, which everyone's heard so many times before. And then I get this email. I don't know where I got it from, and it said this guru by the name of Paramahamsa Vishwananda is coming down to Toronto from Germany. So I said, oh, I've heard about Shaktipat and I've heard about Darshan. Let me check this guy out. So he comes down to Toronto. I go to see him. It was September the 3rd of 2019. I go to see him, and a lot of people were there, this huge lineup. And I'm like, there's a lot of people here. I've never heard of this guy before in my life. I'm talking to some of the people there, and some of them are followers of Wanda, Paramahamsa Vishwananda. And I would talk to them and ask them questions. Why do you follow this man? And they would tell me these crazy, miraculous stories of why they dropped everything that they were doing. These guys were like they were academics and everything. They dropped their careers and everything to follow this man. And I couldn't understand why. So they're giving me their stories, they're telling me about him and things of that sort. And I said, okay, this is interesting. So we had to line up to see the guru. And for those who don't know, what Darshan is like looking to the eyes of the divine. So what he does is he'll look into your eyes for 20 seconds. So you put his hands on your head and you look into your eyes for 20 seconds. So now it's my turn. I go up and he asked me some questions. He put his hand on my head. He looked in my eyes for about 20 seconds. And as I'm walking away, I felt the same type of kriya that I felt with the 5-MeO DMT. So I said, okay, there's something going on here. So I'm feeling the stuff. And for a number of weeks, I'm going through the sensations again of these spasms that are happening in my body and all of that. So I knew there was something to it. And that was in September. Shortly after my grandmother died, she died a few weeks later. I remember that. She died a few weeks later. So we had to deal with that whole thing. We had to bury her, all of that. And then on December 14th, and I'm jumping here. There's so many things that's happened, but I'm just giving a short version of this that happened in the last 16 and a half years at this point. One day I'm meditating. It was a Saturday. I put on my headphones, and at this point, I created my own brainwave entrainment, which is called Eunergy meditation, which you said in
Mm.
the introduction. At this point, I'm years in developing these prototypes, and people are using them, including the guys that I was doing the DMT and all that stuff with. And I'm meditating, and it happened. Everything that people said about what happens with 5-MeO, all that happened, of course, with no existence, non-existence, existence, past, present, and future was happening in the space. I was past, present, and future. I was all beings, all human beings, all sentient beings, all non-sentient beings. I was every place, every I was every place, I was every being, I was all time and space, I was existence itself, I was non-existence, I was the ground of all being, I was Morgan, I was you, I was all planets, I was all solar systems, all galaxies, all universes, and all of them collapsed into nothing. Yet at the same time, everythingness was all in the same. It was omnipresent. It was non-local. I was absolutely everything that ever was and ever shall be. Past, present, future, all happening in the same space. It was absolute monism. It was the absolute singularity of all things, of everything, of nothing, of God, of man, of animal, of microscopic creatures, of lizards, reptiles, of particles, subatomic particles, macro, the micro, every situation, every event, every action, every thought, every intention. It was the Big Bang. It was the ending of the universe. It was prior to the Big Bang, prior to that, the one prior to that, the one prior to that. It was string theory. It was mathematics. It was physics. It was science. It was art. It was entertainment. It was
Yeah.
just this absolute mind blowing. The kings of kings, the lords of lords. it surpassed any 5-MeO experience I've ever done. Any psilocybin, any LSD, any traditional meditation, everything. It was just absolutely everything. I can't even find words to describe it. It was so mind blowing that it was also beyond the universe. It wasn't. I can't even find the words to describe it. I knew at the moment I was Brahmin. I just and it was no I to witness it because my ego was totally offline. It was gone. There was no me yet there was. I don't know. It was just absolutely mind blowing. I believe my eyes were open, and I didn't see anything. I didn't see an actual thing. It was just all a feeling because it was so non-dual. There was nothing for me to see outside of myself because there was no self to even see it. So if someone asked me, what did it look like? I couldn't tell you because there was nothing to see. It was just this feeling. I can't even describe it, but it wasn't even a feeling. Because, yeah, I don't even know what that was. And then after that experience, that already was my most mind-blowing experience of my entire life, ever, by far. And it wasn't even over. So after that took place, I ended up having a full-blown Kundalini awakening. Right after it, right after that. So now I'm having this. I can feel something happening at the tailbone of my spine, right? But it wasn't electricity, like when people talk about it. It wasn't like that. It felt like it was a python snake, like a giant python snake passing through my spinal column. So I can feel it moving from the tailbone of my spine, and it's pushing throughout my spinal column, and it's wrapped around the spinal column, but within it, and it's pushing upwards. And I remember it pushing up to my solar plex, and it pushed up to my heart chakra, and then it pushed up to my throat. I felt like I was choking, and I felt this thing trying to get out of my throat. So it got stuck in my throat. And then it pushed through my throat. So I feel like I'm vomiting, but there's nothing coming out. And it hit my third eye, and then it burst out of my crown chakra. And all I saw, now I can see something. I'm seeing trillions and trillions and trillions of light petals, like flower petals, pouring out of my skull, just pouring out of my skull. And as it's pouring out of my skull, as it hit the ground, it would dissipate. I can hear the sounds as the stuff was pouring out of my skull. I felt like I was water, but dry water. It wasn't even wet. It was just, I felt, not only that I felt like I was water, but it felt like I was in water, but it wasn't wet water. It was just this feeling of whatever it was. But every
You
time
had
I
become the
moved,
atmosphere.
I
You'd
became
become
the
the atmosphere.
atmosphere, right?
Yeah.
I became the
Yeah.
atmosphere. And every time I moved, the atmosphere and the whole entire universe moved with me. And every time the universe moved, I moved with it. So miraculous. It was just absolutely extraordinary. It got to the point where every cell, every molecule, every atom, every particle within that all broke out like this. It blossomed like flowers. Just everything about me just became flowers. And everything of my body shouted out with a loud voice in all languages, I am God.
I love it.
I didn't know where to go with
I
that.
love it, Morgan. I love it. Your description
Just
is just
incredible. Just
amazing.
unbelievable. And I understood for the first time what yoga actually meant, being the union with the divine. It was
Yeah.
just absolutely extraordinary. I can't even, oh, Jesus, I can't. But if you saw me from the outside, I'm having a total fit. I'm having spasms and I couldn't control any of my
Yeah.
body movements because I felt like jelly. It felt like I couldn't feel any bones on my body or anything like that. It just felt like jelly. And if you saw me from the outside, I'm having a full spasm. But that's
Yeah.
not what it felt like inside. It felt like I was doing all the yoga poses simultaneously. Like I was doing every single
Yeah.
asana within that moment of time. But from the outside,
Yeah, you probably thought you were this piece of artwork, and then if somebody was on the outside looking at you, you'd be like,
oh my God, we gotta
who's
call
this?
the ambulance. We gotta call 911.
He's,
Yeah, it was
he's been drinking too much.
yeah, totally lost it. I think I was even drooling from the mouth. That's how
Yeah.
insane it was. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I remember I'm coming down from the experience and I even broke my headphones. So I came come down from the experience and I'm just in this state. I'm back in myself. I can realize I'm Morgan again. And I
Yeah.
was so blown out of my mind. To this very day, I'm still blown. After that experience, I would wake up in cold sweat every night. But for 209 days, I'd either wake up in samadhi or when I start meditating, I'll fall into samadhi. And it happened every day for 209 days. And then that started to dissipate. And because at this point, we're into COVID, we're having the pandemic is happening. So while the
And
pandemic was
Morgan,
happening,
just your definition of samadhi. What was happening what was different with samadhi versus your regular meditation?
I've had this experience many times during the regular meditation. It just never happened like every day like that. But
Okay.
this type of samadhi, it wasn't Nirvikalpa samadhi. It was the other one. What do you call the other one?
Savakalpa samadhi, where
Yeah, it was
your
probably more
awareness
like that,
stays.
where my
Yeah.
awareness stays. And it wasn't as intense or anything like that. And it only lasted sometimes a few seconds, maybe the longest a minute. But that would happen like every day.
Okay.
Sometimes though, it would happen where it would stay for hours. But most times it would just stay for a few seconds, a minute and a half max, nothing more than that. But it just happened consistent every day for about 209 days.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's so much more I
So
can
go
say,
on.
but I don't know where you want me to go with it. But yeah. But at that point, yeah, everything changed. So I'm going through the pandemic. And actually at the same time, as I was going through that experience that happened on the 14th, when the pandemic happened, it felt like I started it. It felt like it came from me. I was like, oh my
Okay.
gosh, how powerful is this thing? Yeah. It felt like I started it. Even though I know from the ground of all being, it is the manifestation of all things. So from that standpoint, I definitely knew that. But it was a moment I was like, did I cause that? That's how it felt. That's how deep that was. But of course, being the ground of all being, we all caused that because if you're looking at it from that standpoint. But yeah, that's how mind blowing it was. So my experience of the pandemic was great. I had a great time during the pandemic when everyone was going through their stuff, but that wasn't my experience. Yeah, so I had to be really careful in regards to who I was speaking to, so I didn't come off as insensitive when everyone was going through their stuff. It
Mm.
was challenging from that standpoint, but boy, I had a
Well,
great time right after that experience.
Morgan, I guess on one sense, the pandemic forced a lot of people to go inwards, right? That all of their external activities that they would normally do. And for some people who were going through spiritual awakenings, it was the ideal time to sit and that was your cave to
That's
go
right.
into
Well,
and deepen your experience.
a lot more meditation sessions, group sessions were happening during that time
Yeah.
period. People
Yeah.
started meeting up
Online.
online, on Zoom, and doing a meditation virtual sessions. All that stuff happened that probably wouldn't have happened before the pandemic. It's very true.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So what happened then? So you were in the midst of the pandemic, you were spending time alone. Did you start joining meetings online, transmissions?
I started my own. I started my own.
Okay.
I started doing sessions with 100 people online, doing energy meditation group sessions. So that's what we were doing
Okay.
for how long? And also, I was facilitating sessions with schools. So I would meet with my students, which at that point during the pandemic, I ended up meeting around altogether about 800 students, and we were meditating once a week. They were in 6 week programs, so once a week every week for 6 weeks, and then I would change groups. The schools would give me another set of students, and that's what I was doing throughout the pandemic. So everyone was meditating with me once 2 days a week. But the people that were with me on the energy sessions that what I was doing, about 100 people would meet with me every day, 7 days a
Can you
week
tell me
for a number of months.
what Yinergy was, Morgan? Like, can you explain the whole process of that meditation
Oh, yes, I should. A lot of people don't know what it
technology?
is.
Yeah.
The technology is, and there's a book. I wrote a book about it too. So there's a book that people can pick up on Amazon or at Barnes and
And
Noble.
I linked
You
to
like
that
that?
as well. I'll put
Yeah.
I'll link down
Thank you.
below if anyone is looking. Yeah,
Right.
sure.
Yeah. If anyone's interested, that's called Bodhi in the Brain. And so, what Energy is a brainwave entrainment program made out of binaural beats, but low carrier frequency binaural beats. So this is a lot different than the binaural beats that you may find on YouTube and things of that sort. So this is low carrier frequency binaural beats, which is based on the same technology that HoloSync uses. It's just with the Energy, the difference is I'm using vortex-based mathematics to create the algorithm to create the frequencies for the binaural beats. Vortex-based mathematics is a theorem that was created by a mathematician by the name of Marco Rodin. And Marco Rodin came up with this theorem that was based on many sacred books, including the Baha'i faith literature. And so he realized that everything in the universe was made up of this mathematical algorithm of 124875. So 124875, you break those numbers down. If you add those numbers up together, you'll get 27, and then 2 plus 7 gives you 9. So 9 is the magic number. So the numbers are broken down to 3s, 6s, and 9s that you may have heard from Tesla. So he figured out how to use these numbers without using the actual sacred numbers, because you're supposed to stay away from the 6, 3s, and 9s. You're supposed to use the numbers that makes up 3, 6, or 9, or 3, 6, and 9. So those numbers are 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, which is actually a doubling system of 1, double 2 is 4, double 4 is 8, double 8 is 16, double 16 is 32, and double 32 is 64. If you take those numbers down, you crunch it down to single digit numbers, you always get 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5 into infinity. Back in 2010, in 2008, I discovered Marco Rodin, and I was trying to learn his math. And then by 2010, I figured out how to integrate that information into binaural beats. So I took the information that I
Okay.
learned that I kept studying for about 2 years in regards to the mathematics of the 12475 and the 578421, because anything that happens forward also happens in reverse. And in the center, it creates the numbers 396693 or 693396. I can't remember which one. So those are the numbers you focus on. So I built the binaural beats based on the equivalent of each of those numbers in a sense. It's hard to explain verbally, but it's in the book. I hope people can understand that in the book. So I try to break it down
Great.
how I can make it where people can understand it. But it's based on the 124875s, which makes up the 3, 6s, and 9s. And I found a way to incorporate that within binaural beats, low carrier frequency binaural beats. So Energy itself is a 13 level program. I'm actually going to add a 14 level to it because I found another way to create a 14th level. But each level gets deeper in its carrier frequency. So what I mean is binaural beats are made up of two sounds, a minimum of
Yeah.
two sounds. So you have one tone in one ear and another tone that's slightly different in the other ear, and then the center of your brain hears the difference of those two tones and it produces a beat frequency. But those two tones are pitch frequencies. So if I lower the pitch frequency of those two tones, yet keep the same distance between the two tones, you will still get the same beat frequency. What we do that every time you listen to Energy, you listen to Energy in the first few levels, you listen to Energy for the first 300 and how many sessions? 180 sessions before moving on to the next level. And you keep doing that because I can't give you level 13 because if your body hasn't been purified from all what they call karmic goop within the nervous system and within the nadis, 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 um, the stuff has to be purified out of the system. If not, if you were using one of the sessions that are too low in frequency, because the lower the frequency, the higher the amplitude. It means it's stronger. So if you do something like that too soon, you may end up having a Kundalini syndrome. So you're trying to avoid
Okay.
that as much as possible because you're probably going to have a Kundalini syndrome anyway, but you don't want it to that degree to where you can't work, you can't do anything, your body's shut down, you're vomiting, you're having kidney pains. You're trying to avoid a lot of that as much as possible, even though
So
for those who knows
basically,
about the,
you're saying that you have to start off slow, go
you got
through
to
the
start off slow,
purification,
go through the
and
purification
then yeah,
process, and then move
yeah,
on to the next level. And you keep doing that over and
okay,
over again. Not everyone sticks all the way through at all the levels. A lot of people stop at level 2, level 3, but people have the option to go from each level up to all the way to 13 and eventually to 14 once I implement that into the program. That's what it is. It's a low carrier frequency. It's a lot like holosync. It's just in this case, we're using sacred mathematics such as vortex-based mathematics to create the frequencies that goes into each of these sessions.
okay. And are they layered into the guided meditation, Morgan?
They
Or is it
can
just a
be.
straight tone? Is it
It's
just
it's
straight
it's straight.
tone?
It's tones decorated with nature sounds or music and things of that sort. So when people did it with
Oh,
me during COVID, during the pandemic, those were embedded with music. When I do them and the ones that I sell to people, it's with nature sounds like rain or nature and like the outdoors and things of that sort. Only because I don't use music in those cases because you probably don't want to listen to the same music every day for 180 days. So I try to
yeah.
avoid that. But when people do sessions with me in group sessions, I use music.
Okay. And tell me, what sort of results do people have with the tones?
Um, Quite a few people in the group that have stuck with the energy also ended up having spiritual awakenings as well. So that has happened.
Okay.
In a lot of the cases, people have extraordinary peak experiences, either with entheogens or without entheogens. So a lot of that has happened. So I get a lot of reports on a regular basis of epiphanies that they've had, spiritual awakenings or spiritual experiences. Because people use it in different ways. Some people use it for healing. Some people use it for awakening. Some people are just using it because they want to reduce stress and things of that sort. And then they realize how powerful these sessions are when using energy. It's Shakti pot in a can or Shakti pot on CD or type of thing. So
So
it's
there's a
very, very, very
transmission
powerful
embedded. Transmission,
type of thing
spiritual transmission,
through the numbers,
mathematical, yeah, through
through
the
the mathematical
numbers
equations. Yeah,
embedded into the tones. Okay. And people
yeah,
can download these from your website, is that right?
yeah. They can download them from my Gumroad site because it's a grassroots project. People can download from that. You can link it to that as well. If they don't have it, I can send it to you.
Yeah, of course I will. Yeah.
Yeah, and people can get a hold of me, or they can download Unity from that site. That yeah, types of stuff. But Unity is so freaking powerful that I'm glad that I was in the position to figure out how to make that version of binaural beats in corporation with Marco's vortex-based mathematics and how to use those numbers. Because it just appeared to me one Saturday. Everything happens on the Saturday for me. I was working out, and as I was working out with these barbells, with this barbell, I figured out because there's a mathematical chart that you're looking at, and I figured out. I looked at it, I turned it to its side, and I went, "Oh my gosh, I can make a binaural beat based on the structure of these algorithms because it's 12 algorithms of the same numbers, all done from different perspectives." And I found a way to combine all those algorithms, which is the 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5, 5, 7, 8, 4, 2, 1. In the center, you keep that blank because the center is producing the 3, 6, and the 9s. So that's the center of your brain. And then you keep doing that over and over again until if awakening is your goal, eventually that will, of course, with a lot of stuff that happens in between, awakening can be the goal. At least a lot more people can awaken that way if they have, especially if they're having trouble meditating the traditional methods. They can just put on headphones, sit up with your back straight, eyes closed, and you do this every day for an hour. So each session of energy takes you from beta, for anyone who knows the brainwave ranges, from beta down to alpha, down to theta, and keeps you in delta for 40 minutes. But there's different types of energy too. There's ones where it stays in alpha for 40 minutes, and then 10 minutes in theta and 10 minutes in delta, or 40 minutes in theta. So that means 10 minutes in alpha, 10 minutes in delta, but 40 minutes in theta. And then there's other ones where are prototypes that aren't on the market yet, where it goes the other way, where it goes from beta up to gamma, up to hyper gamma, up to lambda. And there are ones that will stay in gamma for 40 minutes and then moves up. Some that stay in hyper gamma for 40 minutes and it moves up, and others that stay in lambda for 40 minutes and it stays in because lambda is like the last brainwave that's been researched. But there's probably even higher brainwaves above that.
More. Okay, can you explain exactly what's happening with these different brain waves? So you take the average person walking around in their waking state, their brain waves are steady at what? What are we talking?
The average person, when they're walking around, they're probably in the beta state. So they're probably in the range of 13, 14 hertz for the
So
average
okay,
person, unless they get
so
excited or have a stimuli or anything like that. They're probably like 14 hertz, 16 hertz.
Okay, and then they sit down, they close their eyes, they put your brainwave entrainment on,
Put on
and
the
what
headphones.
what happens? What's happening? So there's tones, different tones playing in each ear, and what's
Yeah,
at the
there's like
brain? What's
63 tones that are playing in each ear. 63 different tones of going through the 1, 2, 4, 8, 7, 5s, which I have to explain more in depth if I ever had the time. So you put on the headphones, and then what happens is the energy, your brain waves will start to resonate with the external stimuli, which is the sound. Your brain will start to slow down because it's resonating with the sound, because your brain does this anyway. Anytime you're in any environment, your brain and nervous system tries to adapt to the environment that's in. Just so when you put on brainwave entrainment, your brain will do just that. So your brain will start to try to resonate with the frequency that it's hearing. So it will slow down from a beta state, it will slow down to alpha, and then it will slow down to theta, and then it will keep you in delta. And delta is like in the range, the brainwave, it's in the frequency of 4 hertz downwards. So
yeah,
after delta,
yeah.
there's even another brainwave, which is called epsilon or epsilon, or whatever they call it. And that's an even deeper, a slower brainwave. And I have ones that are made in epsilon as well. So it takes you from beta, slows your brain waves down to alpha, slows them down even more down to theta. At least that's the goal. And it pushes you into delta for 40 minutes. Even if you're not producing those brain waves as yet, as time goes on, your brain will start to mimic those frequencies downwards. So what I believe is happening is, what's happening is, because with your brain, your eyes, your nostrils, and your ears, they all cross. I'm raising my left hand right now, but it's my right part of the brain that's doing that. If I raise my right hand, it's my left side of the brain that's doing that. Same thing happens with your eyes, same thing that happens with your nostrils. That's why alternate breathing is important, because you're balancing out the two hemispheres of your brain. Same thing with the ears. So if you play two different frequencies, you're doing the crossover of the two brainwave of the brain hemispheres. They're crossing. So you're starting to create whole brain thinking, whole brain functioning. So I believe that when people actually have an actual
Okay,
awakening, in all cases, they're actually having a whole brain synchronization experience that causes the non-dual experience.
okay. So we have some people who are left brain inclined, analytical, and then the opposite, right? The
And
intuitive
then the
people.
opposite, the
But
intuitive, the
really,
creative,
yeah, but really we want a whole brain experience,
the
right?
whole brain
So
experience.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So you're
And the
forcing that on a
brainwave
regular
entrainment,
basis.
it locks that in. It locks that
It locks
experience
that
in
in.
for a particular
Yeah.
time.
For a particular time, and then after a while your brain will get used to that, your nervous system will get used to that, and so that you can produce that sensation on its own without the brainwave entrainment. So you can walk around in everyday life with a more synchronized brain. So now when you're going through
Okay.
life, you start to see things differently, because we automatically choose me over other, black versus white. The list goes on of all the different opposites. But when you start synchronizing the two hemispheres of your brain, you start to see the world differently, because now the brain is synchronizing, and you're not more dominant over one side over the other, because everything is based on how you see things through the neural process. So all that stuff starts to change over time. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, a lot of time. But if you stick with it, especially throughout the years, you'll start to produce more, people will start to produce more of that entrainment, that synchronization of the two hemispheres of the brain, which I believe is causing a lot of the what we call non-dual experiences, spiritual awakening, and things of that sort. It has to do with the synchronization of the two hemispheres.
So less me and mine and more kind of a unified, unity consciousness feeling with everybody, oneness.
Yeah, that will
Um,
start to happen eventually. Yeah, that'll start to happen eventually. And then, of course, you get to the point as after that point, it's beyond the brain. The brain is just one out of many brains within the umbrella of all consciousness. But it starts off with you as an individual working on the individual brain until the individual brain transcends itself. And then you realize that it's even beyond the brain. Even though my book is called Bodhi in the Brain, the truth is the brain is in the Bodhi, so to
yes,
speak.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the book, I'll link reference to the book and to the brainwave entrainment, to the energy. Anything else you'd like to list, Morgan?
There's so much I can speak on. I gave a short version of everything that happened, because all this stuff happened within the 16 and a half years, right? So there's a lot of things that happen, many different types of experiences that happen. But a lot of people who know me personally know that I don't really talk about the stories too much, because the stories were never my goal. My goal was awakening. Can I awake? Can I awake? But I've had extraordinary amounts of astral projection and things of that sort, that if I went into that, it would take me weeks to get through. So a lot of those great things happened too. But my goal was always awakening, awakening. So that's what I always
Sure,
focused on.
sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So, okay, but maybe with the tones, with the OBEs might be a byproduct also of using
They
them, the
can be.
energy.
They can be. It's
Yeah.
never happened to me. I've never actually had an out of body experience, but I know of other people when they've done energy, they've had out of body experiences. So it can do that. It can do out of body experiences, astral projection, what people have done, mixing it with psychedelics or mixing with microdosing. It can be done that way. It can be mixed with any form of therapy, any spiritual practice. So if you already have a spiritual practice that you've already been doing, all you have to do is just integrate energy with that. It works with any forms of therapy. It complements everything. If you, there's a way that you can actually keep headphones on. So like it'd be hard with yoga because if you're doing certain asanas with yoga, it may be harder to do. But if you're doing energy on a regular basis and you go to your yoga, you do your yoga practice, that's fine too. But it can complement any spiritual practice, any form of therapy, any shamanism practice. They can do all of that. Yeah, it's just a great tool to use, and it's easy to use. But of course, for those who are serious seekers, you're going to go through all this stuff like any other seeker. So all the stuff that people have reported in regards to the difficulties, the challenges that happens within the nervous system, you're going to go through those things too. I'm not going to lie. So people need to be careful when they're doing energy because sometimes people would want to do energy and they want to do more than one session per day. And my thing is just stick to the 1 hour. Just stick to the 1 hour. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff unless if you've done enough sessions with energy and later on your nervous system and your brain and nervous system has gotten used to that, then you can do an extra hour. Maybe do an extra hour while walking, do a walking meditation. You could do that. There's other ways that you can use the energy from that standpoint, but there's no need to do an extra hour because 1 hour of energy is like the equivalent of 8 to 10 traditional 1 hour sessions. So you don't need to do more per day. But I know a lot of people, they like the sensation that they feel because people, when they do energy, some people get a lot of great meditative sensations from that and said, let me do another hour because I want to continue those sessions. And you could do that, but you may have to deal with the consequence
There's
of
a
that.
little bit of backlash.
There's a bit of the backlash when your nervous system has to purge. And so you want to be extra careful with things of that sort.
And Morgan, at any stage, because it sounds like it's a really useful tool and or training wheels. At any stage, do you go beyond the training wheels? Do you stop using them eventually?
If you choose, I still use them. I still use them, but at this point, I'm also doing neurofeedback training. So that was another thing that I was doing back in 2017, before and after I started experimenting with 5-MeO. I was doing neurofeedback training, but now I have my own neurofeedback training device at home. So I do a number of neurofeedback trainings along with my energy practice. So I still do because I just love doing it.
Just explain what that is, Morgan.
Neurofeedback training. Neurofeedback training, if I can explain it properly, it's been around for a long time. It's been around for, gosh, probably 70 years, maybe 50, 60, 70 years. It's longer than 50 for sure. But neurofeedback training is it's a device where they hook up these electrodes to your scalp, just like an EEG machine type of device.
Okay.
And it reads your brainwaves, it feeds it to the computer, and then the computer, through an amplifier, feeds the information back to your brain. Because your brain cannot read itself within its structure. It doesn't have a way to get feedback of what the actual brain is doing. So by having this type of device, it takes the information, feeds it back to your brain in real time so your brain knows what to do with it. So if your brain senses any type of disruption within the brain waves, your brain now knows how to fix it because it's receiving instant feedback. So it's a great tool for all meditators if they have some neurofeedback training, because at least you get a chance for your brain to get a chance of what it's listening to, of what's happening within its own self, so it can fix whatever it needs to fix. When you're able to fix those things, it will deepen the individual's meditation practice. It will deepen their everyday experience. It may also help people with ADHD and ADD and depression and stress. It also helps athletes improve their performance and a whole bunch of other things. Neurofeedback training is very important that people can do. What I do is I combine neurofeedback with energy as well.
And the tones themselves, the energy meditations, you just mentioned that they might be good for people with ADHD, those kind of things. Can people use them?
They can use them. I feel that neurofeedback training is probably better for ADD and ADHD and things of that sort. But things like energy and brainwave entrainments of any sort can be good if you're using them. And the thing about energy is not designed to treat ADHD and ADD specifically, but you can make a binaural beat. You can get a binaural beat off YouTube that is specific for ADHD. That probably would work really well in regards to that. But when it comes to neurofeedback training, can target the actual symptom that you're going through, as opposed to a binaural beat where it's general. But with the neurofeedback, you can target the type of brainwave that you're trying to produce that will improve the ADHD or the ADD and things of that sort. So it's different in that sense. So it's not that one's better than the other. It's just they're really strong for a certain purpose.
And they can be combined.
They can be. I wouldn't recommend combining them in the same session. I don't combine that because especially if you're doing something like energy, you can break out into rashes. That stuff can happen. But you can do like a neurofeedback session in the morning and do your energy in the evening, or vice versa. You can do that type of stuff if you chose to do that.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, so I'm going to link to all of your socials, your website, to the energy meditations. Yeah, is there anything else you'd like to cover before we finish, Morgan? It's been a great conversation.
All I could say is if there's anyone who's on the search for awakening, I recommend that people do this. This is if you're seeking liberation, we've all heard the terms like moksha, nirvana, things of that sort. All these things are possible. My life has changed tremendously after having such an awakening. I won't lie though, I've gone through periods of even more periods of dark night of the soul, especially just recently. This year I went through a whole period of dark night of the soul, but even as it's happening, I'm witnessing as it's happening. The witness is never harmed by any of these things. It just watches and it's amused by its own manifestation. But boy, these were some painful periods, yet my threshold is so high I can deal with it. But right now, I'm not going through any dark night of the soul or anything of that sort. Right now, things are very peaceful. I'm going through some challenging times, but the self, the individual, is watching everything that is happening, and it's just heaven on earth. Yeah. So I recommend that people search for this. This is the ultimate thing to search for. The spiritual awakening, non-dual awakening, Kundalini awakening. These are well worth it. I would have never believed it if you told me this stuff 21 years ago. I would have slapped you in the face. I probably would have punched you. I said, "Shut up! You're talking nonsense." But this stuff is.
I totally agree, Morgan.
So true. Totally agree. Boy, is it ever true.
I totally agree. Yeah, totally. That's been amazing. Thanks so much, Morgan. It's been a wonderful conversation, and it was really pleasure to hear how you described your awakening, and you really animated it when you were going through it. It was almost like I was there with you going through the awakening.
Oh my gosh, that was insane. That was insane. And the thing is, everything I said doesn't even cover what actually happened. Nothing I said comes in anywhere close to what happened. Not even close. But it's the best I can explain it in this moment. But yeah, trust me, it was by far the greatest experience of my existence, but not only my existence, but everyone's existence, because everyone was experienced. Everything was experienced. The whole universe was experienced. The multiverse was experienced. All theories and theorems and everything was experienced, all in one, yet it wasn't me experiencing it. I was those things. I don't even know what to say about it. All I can say is this is where all the shit that I had to go through, all the challenges I had to go through, all the Kundalini syndromes and all the purging, the painful purging of the heart and the kidney area and the throat and the stomach and everything. It was worth it. It was totally worth it. Knowing what I know now, I would do it all over again, knowing what I know now. I highly recommend. Maybe not everyone should do. I should take that back. There's probably certain people that probably can't due to, for other reasons. But for the majority of us, trust me on this. There's nothing greater. I don't care if it's about winning the lottery or winning a Grammy Award. There's nothing greater than this thing right now in this space right now. I can't see anything greater than this.
Yeah. Morgan, you've sold it to me anyway.
You've done it yourself. Who am I talking to? So.
And I'm sure a lot of the viewers and listeners will listen to this, and I totally back up what you're saying. It's the pinnacle of your existence, the pinnacle, right? It's
the human existence, period. Like,
yeah. And it's there. It's everybody's birthright, and go for it. I totally concur with everything you've said.
And Morgan, a lot of people I met said I was crazy, but when they had it themselves, they said, "Morgan, I know exactly what you're talking about." But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, Morgan, you've been an amazing guest. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the viewers and the listeners. Yeah, thank you so much, Morgan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Highly appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Bye.
This has been the Endless Possibilities Podcast, where the journey of spiritual awakening and energy healing unfolds. Garrett is a lifelong seeker of truth, a spiritual teacher and author, and it's his passion to delve into the profound world of consciousness. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. If you did, make sure to like, rate, and review. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, the podcast is available on YouTube and all the major podcasting platforms. Find us on Instagram at _mother_force. Take care, and we'll see you soon on the Endless Possibilities Podcast.